Another simple one that we actually did in this company, we said, we're going to focus on SIF. Whenever there's a significant injury, fatality, potential event, we are going to treat it as if there was a fatality or injury, and we're going to investigate it. It's going to be, let's look at the hierarchy of controls, and let's make sure we're above PPE and administrative. And by the way, I'm not signing off on this until I'm satisfied that's happened. That'll change culture tomorrow.
Hey, and welcome back to the Electrical Safety Podcast. I'm your host, Jon Travis, and today I'm speaking with Larry Pearlman. Larry, thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely, John. Great to be here.
I mean, we were just having a brief conversation before we hit record, and it sounds like there's an awful lot of stuff that we could talk about here, so hopefully we can squeeze it all in. But just to kind of get things going, it's always good to kind of give people, a bit of a background on what you do and how you kind of got to where you are. And you can take as long as you need or as long as you want to go back and tell the story. But it's always interesting, I find, how people get into safety. And then when they get into safety, then what roads they kind of take and where they end up. So,
yeah, I'll start from the beginning. My educational background is actually human resource management and labor relations. I have both an undergraduate and a master's degree in labor relations, human resources. And I did that sort of work mostly in the oil industry for the first 15 years of my career. The good news was it really gave me an understanding of how do you drive behavior in large, complex organizations and what makes it tick and how do systems work with each other. The bad news was it took me about 15 years to figure out I really didn't like it.
mm-hmm.
That ended up coinciding with a pretty significant incident in the company I was working for, or had been working for, and that was BP Corporation. And they, of course, had one of the larger process safety incidents, which was the Texas City refinery explosion and fire and subsequent death of 15 employees. Because I had that oil industry background, and because I understood organizational development, organizational design, human resources, I was asked to go on the team that was trying to figure out what the heck happened and how do we prevent it from happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent almost 3 years with BP going through their leadership, their systems, their processes, culture, as well as things like how did they measure risk, how did they quantify risk, and how did they prioritize risk, which ultimately landed in them creating their operations integrity management system, which we all know is a safety management system. And I really enjoyed it. I ended up working for other organizations like Shell and Hess, again, mostly in the oil industry. The consulting firm that I was working for got bought by Marsh McLennan, and I went into their consulting division, eventually running their US and a little bit of Canada safety consulting practice. And that was really great because I learned that I could take all the stuff that I learned in the energy industry and start applying it to transportation and manufacturing firms. And I've had the pleasure of working everyone from like Chick-fil-A in the US all the way to FedEx and companies like Delta Airlines and Northrop Grumman, a really wide, varied safety career. And now I run my own firm. I've been at it for just over 2 years, and
Mm-hmm.
I really specialize in safety leadership, safety culture, and how do you make stuff happen, usually by engaging your workforce to co-create and design the systems that need to be implemented so they own it, so we can actually get the results that we're looking for.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Actually, that's a good point just to kind of move off of is that idea of co-creation and getting buy-in. And I guess the thought that kind of came to mind was it sounds like a great idea. And I'm imagining you get a group of individuals who maybe volunteer to be a part of this that are, they're not on the management team necessarily. They're in the field. They could be coming from all parts of the organization. Is there certain characteristics of those people, or is there what is it that, that you would say really makes them care to want to see that change? And maybe there's multiple things. I don't know. What do you see with all these organizations? And
yeah, So, John, I very rarely encounter people who are against safety. Everyone wants to do safety. Then it's a matter of what do we have to sacrifice to make that happen? And
Mm,
that's a mental model that you actually have to sacrifice things. But most people, if you give them the time, the space, and an approach, they're more than happy to create it. You do need to choose wisely who you have on those teams that are doing that co-creation. You don't want the naysayer because it's just going to be a difficult sell. And you actually don't want the person who's overly exuberant either because they actually turn off most of the population.
hmm
So I like to focus on the folks who are fast followers. If it's a good idea and it makes sense, they're up for it. And I call the other group of people the show me's. They're from the state of Missouri that they want to see that it's going to work.
hmm
And you get those show me's involved and you couple them with the fast followers, you get good solutions, you get some results. It brings the rest of the organization along, and that's how you make that change. And so being thoughtful about who's involved in that creation is really, really important. I think the other thing is what I learned. I didn't share this with you, John, earlier. I actually had some IT jobs as well as you did in my career. And one of the things that I learned in the IT job is a simple equation. Your results are a function of the quality of the solution multiplied by its acceptance. So I was on an SAP project and everyone hated SAP.
hmm
SAP is a fantastic program. It always has been. It can do anything if you configure it right. But people had a visceral reaction, so their acceptance was really low. And the lunchtime conversation was SAP is a crappy system. Well, it's not. They just weren't involved in creating, designing it, and understanding how it works. So once you give them the ball to say, all right, here's something that needs to be designed that's a component of SAP, now it's the greatest system ever because they own it. Nothing changed with the programming. What changed was the acceptance rate of those individuals involved in it. And safety is no different. When you get the right people involved and you give them that ability to create a solution, they're all in.
hmm Yeah, for sure. And so I guess from there, you had mentioned, and this really kind of piqued my interest, is that you've been speaking lately, or you wrote an article or two on AI and safety. And so, I kind of mentioned that, I haven't been that into it, but I kind of got onto a few podcasts lately with regards to AI. So it sounds like some interesting stuff. And I hadn't even thought about how to apply that to safety yet. So, what is it that you've been kind of looking into?
Yeah. So from my perspective, what I've been looking into is how can safety professionals kind of be that fast follower and really get into what does the technology hold for them and take AI from it's just Google on steroids into it's actually going to be your thought partner. I was on the phone with a safety executive just before our call here, and we were talking about incident investigation. I said, one of the things that AI can do is you can write out your accident investigation and you can throw it into an AI engine and you can ask it things like, what did I miss? Where are there areas where I might not have been objective enough? Analyze the recommendation for how well it fits with the hierarchy of controls. You can ask it to make additional recommendations based on whatever knowledge base it has, and you could give it the process for how you wanted to analyze it. So that's at a very basic level where we are in control, and now we're using AI as a, hey, check me against what good looks like and help me think about where the soft spots are in my analysis so I can do better at this before I finalize the project. Another way, there's a company that I've worked with for several years called Asaya, and they started out in the aviation space. And what they wanted to know is when an aircraft arrives, unloads, reloads, or departs, pushes back, are the people in the right place? Are vehicles away from the aircraft? Are there any potential points of collision between that aircraft and ground equipment or jetways or other equipment in there? And you can use cameras that will be utilizing artificial intelligence to answer that question. So it's trained to look for ergonomic issues with the unloading of bags. It's trained to look at positioning of people. It's trained to look at proper PPE use for folks on the ramp. It's trained to know where the wing walkers need to position themselves relative to the wing, the aircraft, and the pilot. And all of a sudden, you can start getting data that you would have had to have an army of people out there doing observations, and those observations would be subjective.
Mm-hmm.
So now you can literally roll the tape, do the analysis, and the system knows what a near miss is. It knows what an accident is. It knows what unsafe behavior is. It knows what a safe behavior is. And now you can take that data to reinforce the good things that are going on probably 95, 98% of the time. And you could start doing the corrective action for the folks who aren't. Okay, this wing walker wasn't positioned in a place where they could visibly see the pilot, and this one was wholly using the wrong, incorrect signals as they're guiding the aircraft in with the light sticks, which I think is just phenomenal. And it's an awful, awful lot of data that we couldn't possibly do with observations and hard traditional ways that we gather information on near misses.
Yeah. So like one of the thoughts that I'm sure a lot of people had with just AI in general is, is it going to kind of take my job? But what you just kind of told me is maybe you have this one or two people who are responsible to, let's say, do observations. Well, there's no possible way because you'd need 500 to do that many.
Exactly.
So now those two people, if they use the AI, they actually can get whatever multiples of data that is more. And so theoretically, you use this and now you've just become more powerful to drop the incident levels and things like that. And that's pretty cool. I hadn't thought about that before. Is there anywhere else that you kind of looked at using it?
Yeah, so kudos and a shout out to Eduardo Land, who's been my thought partner on this and co-author. We started out with some simple things like how can you use it better for toolbox talks? So if you tell AI, hey, I want an engaging toolbox talk where your team isn't just sitting there listening to someone talk, you could tell AI, I need a toolbox talk on lockout tagout. I need relevant experiences from plastics extrusions companies. I need some incidents. I need some discussion topics to engage my team. All of a sudden now, I can go ahead and have AI as a thought partner help me create what that toolbox talks like. I can use the generative part to say, no, this isn't correct. I'd like to have you do this change or that change. And boom, you have something. And then if it's on a recordable format, you can throw it back into AI and say, give me a critique on how well I did based on what we wanted to do. And it'll tell you, hey, I did this right well, and I missed the boat on this one, and try doing these things next time. So very, very powerful. And to your point on, are we going to go up or down on employment for safety people? I don't know the answer to that one, but I do know the folks who are going to survive are going to figure out how to do this stuff well and how to be an early adopter on AI technology and start integrating it into their daily tasks.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, so another thought I had was kind of from what you just said with the toolbox talks, and maybe this isn't the right way to look at it, but I'll try. So when we first started talking, you mentioned about culture and leadership and, kind of thinking about the things that really makes people think about safety and buy into it and all that stuff. And I think a big part of that is human connection. And so don't get me wrong, I'm not saying not to do this, but let's say that you go to AI and you type something up, and then you bring that and you're like, read it to the group as a toolbox talk. And then they start to think like, oh, well, John's just using AI, so that's not really him. I still think you're right. I still think from an idea generation standpoint, you can come up with stuff way faster, way better. Yeah, not my fear, but what I'm thinking is that if people go too far into the technology and rely on it too much, they're going to start losing that human connection. And and that might impact safety in a way too. Do you know what I mean? Like, have you thought? I guess that's kind of an all over the place thought, but have you thought about that at all? Like, how do you balance almost like relying on it too much from still just that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because I'll listen to a podcast and they'll talk about AI and the capability of AI to be a mental health practitioner and to ask and guide a conversation with people. And I've also heard some, I can't recall the statistics offhand, but one of the primary drivers for people using AI is actually to feel connected.
Mm,
And I'm blown away by that. I would never ever assume that people want this connection through an AI system. What I've assumed is really the case is that safety is always about caring for the individual. And you and I can have a conversation about caring. The frontline leaders need to understand, what does good caring look like? It's well beyond, did you have a good weekend? Because a computer can ask that. A
yeah.
computer can remember, all right, John, I know you have 8 kids. I know 7 of them are boys because I've got that data. But to actually genuinely have a conversation and express interest and get that emotional connection is one of the prerequisites to really setting the right culture, setting the right tone, and getting that caring environment going through.
Right.
We have to take it to the point where we use that connection to then start talking about risks and how well those risks are mitigated and generating ideas from that conversation of, oh, we could do this better from a production standpoint. We could do this better from a quality standpoint. Oh, and when we do this and this, we'll have better safety outcomes.
Yeah. So like you mentioned earlier that you never really run across anyone who doesn't say that they want safety in their organization and that's probably true, especially in today's day and age, that people wouldn't say that. Now what they do might tell you a different story, and I'm not saying that they're going to be reckless and if there's a safety situation there's to hell with that, we're just going to do it anyway. Like, that's not probably not going to happen, but they might not think about things, and they might in the heat of the moment make decisions that are more because they want to meet their operational goals or something like that. And if you program an AI to like make some decision at some point, 52% threshold, it's going to make that decision, and below it's going to make, and there's something there where, like, because that's the thing about human beings is they're not AI, and they're going to make mistakes, which could be bad for safety, but also on the human side of things, on, do you actually care about me? Well, I think that's almost an important part of that equation, because the AI it's just a program. It doesn't go unless it's programmed to be random and never know, but I don't know.
But I think you're onto something, John. You can't, it's almost like, okay, go ahead, John, and demonstrate compassion and caring now. And that's just, it's got to be genuine. And at least as far as I've seen the advancement, we're not into the world of Cylon warriors where now they look and act like people. We're very far. Just try and use a chat with an airline on trying to get a change going on. And, those are pretty miserable. So it gives me a lot of confidence. We don't have to worry about the Cylons or the Terminators coming yet for a while. But I give the example when I coach leaders that the difference between human DNA and chimpanzee DNA is only about 2%. And that 2% matters. And I go, that's the difference between craving a Twinkie or a banana at this point. We're humans, we're not chimpanzees. And where that's important, and it goes back to what you were saying, that most leaders want safety. But when it comes down to a rush order, for example, the leader will say, this is really hot, we got to get it out the door. And they forgot to balance that with some safety message, which typically should be things like, okay, guys, I know we've got a lot of pressure. This is an important customer, but you know what? No box is worth a finger. So let's make sure we've got safety first. We'll meet the needs of the client. Let's get it done safely first. And that's curing conversation that most managers leave out that safety. Let's get it out the door. And my belief is, and this is actually why the name of my firm is Safety and, that every organization has some stress point in it that's keeping them from being safe. So if you think about a package delivery company, it's safety and speed. If you think about a manufacturing company, it's safety and customer service or and productivity. I do volunteer work at a railroad museum, a historical railroad, and we operate electric trains. Schedules don't matter, but what we found out is volunteerism does. We're a volunteer organization. Volunteers think it's like working in their garage. And if we tell them that, no, you have to do a safety procedure, we're afraid that they're going to leave the volunteer organization and go somewhere. It's a surprising tension, but it was safety and volunteerism. And I think most organizations struggle with that. And bringing it back to the DNA thing on monkeys versus humans, the wise leaders figure out that 2% of their language is what's going to make the difference between safety and unsafe.
That's good. So you mentioned earlier, and I'm interested in what you have to say here, because we've actually got a couple of new hires ourselves here on the team. And so yeah, you mentioned new hire onboarding, and what are some of your thoughts there? I'm just, that got me thinking right away that what are the things I'm missing?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And what I see most organizations do is they're at two ends of the spectrum. One is I'm going to sit them in front of a computer, and I'm going to have them go through, here's all the 12 OSHA programs, bloodborne pathogens, lockout, tagout, driving a car, whatever it happens to be. And when you're done, you'll have taken a test and I'm done. My responsibility is over. Or you sit them in a room and the safety manager, safety assistant, someone takes them through 120 PowerPoint slides. And by the time they're done with that, their memory is zero. And actually the data proves out that most employees, I think it's 6 months after, will tell you they never had any safety orientation at all because it just wasn't memorable. And I start thinking about onboarding as this is the time that you get to set the stage for what you want the culture to look like. So when you're getting these fresh new hires in, let's make sure we've got some winnable things. What's your first day wins? Do I know who my supervisor is? Do I know how to contact them? Are there some safety absolutes I need to know? Where are the exits? And how do I report an incident? First week might be some things around where policies are, where the systems are. First 30 days may be about behavioral coaching and understanding how things actually get done with the mentor. And then the next 60 to 90 days is really about that coaching, that feedback, and getting them really ready to do their job and understand the risks in a deep way. And they understand, here are the procedures we need to do. And for each procedure, I know what the risks are, I know what the mitigations are, and I know what's expected of me. And those are things in the first 90 days. And when they're done, you celebrate it. A lot of manufacturing organizations have green hat programs to identify a new hire, to say, hey, look out for them. They're new. Well, when they figured out what they need to do from a safety perspective, you retire the green hat, you make a big deal of it, and you give them the white hat or the yellow hat, whatever it happens to be. Maybe it's a shirt or a vest, and you celebrate the heck out of it. And it's part of the culture, and they understand what's expected. And then along the way, we don't rely on PowerPoint, but you might create some simulations, you might create some scenarios, you might create some role plays, you might actually have some games. For one major airline, we created a game with an image of the aircraft where we had flight attendants talk about where are the risks on that aircraft to their personal safety. We didn't have to tell them a thing. We just had to ask them a few questions. And then the hard part was facilitating the discussion so they wouldn't keep talking about those risks.
Mentioned role playing. That made me think you could probably do that with AI.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I as you were talking there, I remember I started my well, that's not true, but my first, let's say, real job at a university job was with a mining company, and we did the like, I think it was 2 weeks of safety training. From what I remember, mostly, in a conference room, going through PowerPoint slides forever. And so I at least remember, maybe because it was 2 weeks long, I remember being there and dreading every moment of it. But the thing is that I didn't know what anything was. Like, it was my first real job in mining, like underground mining, right? So there's all kinds of hazards. I had no idea what anything was. So I'm watching these safety videos, and we're talking or whatever. Even if we're talking about Lakotega, like I couldn't actually see what it was. So that idea to kind of like almost take baby steps and transition through probably makes a lot more sense, because now you've kind of got out there. As long as you've got a mentor with you the whole time, then they're kind of looking over your shoulder. But then you could go back through and maybe go through the PowerPoint slide, but it would be a lot more meaningful at that point because you actually understand what the heck they're even talking about. So that's a really cool idea. The other thing you mentioned was with culture, and I know, and I'm interested because you've worked at some big organizations, and I think about this like, we've got a fairly small team here, so I've always wondered that I'm sure there's thresholds of company sizes where you have to approach culture from a very different standpoint. If you're probably less than 30 people, you can have a barbecue and talk to everybody. You know what I mean? Like, you can probably, as soon as you go above that, and then you get to 100 or 1,000, and some of these companies, I mean, BP must, I don't even know how many employees they would have. It's insane, probably.
Yeah.
Um, I'm interested at those big companies. You talk about culture, but I mean, what's your strategy there? What's your approach, or maybe philosophy on it? How do you actually move the needle?
Yeah. So it's funny because most people, I had a conversation with the head of safety for a large manufacturer just last week. And he said, "Why moving culture just it's slow." And I turned to him and said, "Think of the last time you got a new CEO. Was the culture change fast or slow?" And he does one of those and kind of tilts his head. And it was pretty fast. You get a new CEO, everyone's trying to figure out what they need to do, and the culture can move pretty quickly. And excuse me, I gave the example of what would happen if that new CEO says, every time there's a request for capital in my company, I know the engineers and the project managers want to get that price as low as possible because that has lots of impacts on the business. But I want to start thinking about safety, not for this year or next year, but for the next 30 years when we build a capital project.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I'm not going to ask, my first question is not going to be about cost. My first question is going to be, if I gave you 10% more budget, tell me how you'd make this project safer, and let's have a conversation. And every time I have that request for capital expenditures, I'm going to ask that question. Every engineer worth their salt is going to be prepared for that question.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've got them thinking by a simple question and kind of drawing a line in the sand to say, every time we do this, think about the next 30 years for safety. That's going to change the culture. Another simple one that we actually did in this company is we said, we're going to focus on SIF. Whenever there's a significant injury, fatality, potential event, we are going to treat it as if there was a fatality or injury, and we're going to investigate it. And we're going to have the right level of management lead those investigations. And by the way, when we have the recommendation, the answer isn't name, shame, blame, and retrain.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be, let's look at the hierarchy of controls, and let's make sure we're above PPE and administrative, that we're actually looking at engineering controls. And by the way, I'm not signing off on this until I'm satisfied that's happened. That'll change culture tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. No, that's good. Thing that I was thinking, it so we're in the electrical safety space, arc flash, those types of things, and it just time and time again, I just I can't believe we're going into new facilities, and they still haven't designed the arc flash hazards to be low. You can't get rid of them. There are certain things you can do that cost a lot of money, but I always just think of it that like it's just like they built the thing as fast as they could for as little as money as they could, and they didn't think about how could we make this safer for the electrical workers. And I mean, it keeps us in business, so it's fine. But no, it's I've always thought about that if you could just give people the incentive to think about it up front. I mean, that's a great tool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So another thing you mentioned, it's kind of a question that you asked is why, if I got this right, why do people get metrics so wrong?
Yeah.
So what's
Well,
thoughts on
it's
that?
interesting because there's only two metrics that safety people have used for years and years and years. One is a lagging indicator, normally total recordable injury rate or lost time accident rate, and that's driven everything. And there's good reason to use that. Everyone seems to use it. It's standard-ish. There's always some variation on it, but it's kind of universally accepted. And you can always measure, did this person get injured or not? I know people can play games, so that's why it's ish. But it's a good indicator of how safe you have been. Okay. Maybe you don't take it out to two decimal points. Maybe one is enough, or maybe you don't even calculate the decimal points, but you have some view of your past history. And where we struggle tremendously is what's a leading indicator? And I've got a list of leading indicators that I've seen at different companies. It's conversations, it's survey results, it's things like training. Did you have safety training in the last 30 days? It might be things like had a safe observation that I turned in or an unsafe observation that I turned in. Uh, we know at an intuitive level that works, but I haven't seen the math to show that it really does work.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying there's not a role for it, but I think there's some metrics that are better. So I start thinking about, you can't get rid of TRIR, the lagging indicators. I think we can work on the leading indicators tremendously. And some of them are right under our nose. Like most organizations know whether safety training took place or not. And most organizations have some measure of how well people performed in that safety training. So we should be using that. I know that if I have a machine that's behind in preventative maintenance, it's more than likely going to require someone to intervene because it will break down at an irregular schedule versus having maintenance people. Now the operator futzes around and eventually calls the maintenance guy. Well, while that operator's futzing around, there's an opportunity for injury. So I could tell you that maintenance is directly correlated to safety, and it makes sense. I could prove it. I've seen the numbers. I've seen the data. It's correlated. So why don't we use better leading indicators? There's a guy out of Denver, Matt Hollowell, who wants to know how safe is a job right now? And how do you determine that? Well, before I start a job, there should be some things in place. So in a simple world of a machine and moving equipment, moving parts, is the guard in place and is the light curtain working? Those are the two primary barriers. So before I start the job, I need to measure, are those two things in place? If they're not, don't start the job until they are in place. If you did start the job and you only have half of it in place, you only got a 50% metric on it.
Mm-hmm.
So you could start thinking about, what do I need to do right now to get this job done safely? And it gets more complex as you work in trenching and lifting and hoisting and breaking pipes in the oil industry or in the nuclear industry. But there's these series of barriers that need to be in place, and that should be the metric. And then there's some strategic metrics that we don't give ourselves credit for. So if we're going to have a strategy of putting in a safety management system, how far along are we on this? If we're going to have a strategic metric as something as simple as start every meeting with a safety moment, give yourself credit for it, measure that, see what's going on. One of the ones that I think I mentioned, significant injury, fatality, potential investigations. You had a fatality. CEO wants to know, how's that investigation going? That should be on your metrics as well. So you've got the lagging, you've got some leading that are really leading indicators.
Hmm.
It's not pixie dust. You've got the how safe is it now? And now you've got some strategic, and where I think AI is going to come in is we'll have some equations that can actually get us predictive. And I'll give a shout out to United Airlines. They've taken disparate data systems together, and they could tell you at O'Hare Airport in Chicago, gate B12 is likely to have an accident because you've got a new supervisor, you've got poor safety survey results, training is overdue, and maintenance is late. And now they go, all right, we need to get to that gate. We need to see what we can do to help those people be safe. So we will get, as a matter of course, predictive metrics that are based on looking at disparate data sets and helping us focus where we need to be.
That sounds like a pretty smart way to look at things. And I mean, that's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is, we were kind of calling it a safety scorecard, and what are those things? And, some of those are great. The toolbox talks, training, the things that you can do ahead of time. And even I would just say in general, if you are doing those positive safety actions and you're making them count, that you're more likely to improve safety. I would just say, right across. You could probably, if you pick 3 to 5 and just start with that, it's going to make a difference.
It should. And then you've got all this bit about, well, what's the quality of it? So if we're going to do near miss reporting, are they genuinely good, or are they just people filling out the things because they've got an incentive to do it? So I really think safety professionals need to put a high dose of skepticism on some of these metrics. Are they really doing what they say they're going to do? Or are they making us feel good because we need to fill in the blanks for a leading indicator? And I did a study with Mercer Consulting on chemical companies, and there are only a few things that predicted process safety upsets at chemical companies, and it was maintenance. It was, is my safety record communicated to me regularly? Did I have training in the last, I think it was 30 days? And did I have a conversation about safety with my boss? Those 4 things. And there was data to prove it. We showed it. The regression equations were somewhere around 0.7, 0.8, which is pretty good when you're dealing with people and organizations, as opposed to, well, it feels right. So I think we need to be skeptical about the pixie dust solutions.
Yeah. So the last thing I guess I wanted to ask you about was, and you mentioned safety professionals, but you've kind of gone into some detail about safety professional capabilities.
Yeah.
And so what are you looking at when you're talking about that?
So I've worked with, at this point in my career, I've got a lot of gray hair. I'm just glad I still have hair. But thousands of safety professionals. And what I find is, if I look at who the best of the best safety professionals are, yeah, they understand the regulations. Yeah, they could see risk. Yeah, they can figure out the mitigations and do investigations, things like that. But the best of the best start out with a really deep understanding of what the business is, what the business drivers are. And let me give you an example of what that means. If I'm going to request money for a safety program, I've gone ahead and looked at the cost. I've taken a shot at what I think this is going to do to impact lives, as well as what it's going to impact for the business. So give it to them in the language of business, which is financial terms, and make your justification based on what the business is. The second thing around the business that people do is, leaders are always looking for help on what the risk is around the corner. So if I'm going to embark on a new strategy, I'm going to buy new assets, I'm going to sell assets, I'm going to merge companies, I need to be the partner with the line organization to help them say, when you buy this firm, Here's the process for assessing risk. Here's the due diligence process that we need to have. Here's the sort of money we need to allocate for get well programs because we know they're not going to meet our standards. And by the way, they're going to introduce these 3 risks that we've really never thought about and managed. So those are kind of the 2 things from the business perspective. The second thing is change management. So how do you describe the journey that you're going to go on as we're here, hit point A, and we're going to go to point B, and let's figure out and plot how we're going to do that, how we're going to communicate it, how we're going to engage it with people. How do we get to that point and start plotting the course and the path and the necessary change? I think the last thing that excellent safety professionals do is they know how to engage people in a way that helps them solve their own problems. I think a lot of them think that risk identification, risk measurement is something that only a safety professional can do. And it's entirely not true.
Mm-hmm.
Teach a line operator and a warehouse forklift driver how to assess risk in less than 5 minutes. I've done it. It works. They love doing it. And once they see the world with those eyes, you've got them.
Mm-hmm.
It's how do you train people to start solving their own problems so they're engaged and they actually own the solutions of what's going to make them safer. And I think those are the 3 things. It's business, it's change, and it's engagement.
Perfect. Larry, this has been fantastic. Just in closing, maybe it's the articles you got coming up. I don't know if you do any speaking or not, but is there somewhere or something coming up that people should kind of check out, or and where would they find that?
Yeah. So one, I'd encourage you to find me on LinkedIn. I publish a couple of things every month. So it's Larry Pearlman, or safetyand.org is my website. There's several articles that my friend Eduardo Land and I are publishing in the Canadian Occupational Safety Journal. And those are all going to be on artificial intelligence. And then I think the next speaking engagement I have is the Safe Start Forum in October in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Perfect. Larry, thanks a lot.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Yeah.